ואחרון המשתתפים, חביב מיכאל פרוינד, מייסד ויושב ראש ארגון שווה ישראל, לשעבר סגן מנהל אגף ההסברה ותכנון מדיני במשרד ראש הממשלה. בבקשה.
Thank you and good evening. Further to Bonita's remarks, I would just like to say very simply, ditto. I agree with virtually everything she said, not everything, but virtually everything. And I share her passion for reaching out to descendants of Jews, to lost tribes, to hidden Jewish communities, and helping them to strengthen their connection with our people. For much of the past 15 years, in that capacity, I have had to work with various rabbinical systems, including the chief rabbinate here. And what I want to touch upon is what I see as really the only possible portal of entry to the Jewish people, the only possible portal that is acceptable across the spectrum, and that can serve to unite the Jewish people rather than divide us among ourselves. Conceptually speaking, Judaism, as the late Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik pointed out, encompasses two covenants. There is the covenant of Egypt and the covenant of Sinai. The covenant of Egypt refers to Jewish history and to Jewish destiny, to the willingness to tie one's historical fate with that of the Jewish people as a whole, as a collective entity. In other words, the Jew's relationship with God is not merely a private endeavor, it is something that is inextricably linked to the community, to the nation of Israel. The point of contact with the divine is both individual and shared in scope. The covenant of Sinai, of course, is a reference to revelation, to the Torah, to the halakha, which define and guide Jewish existence. It is expressed through the customs and the traditions, through the fidelity to the rites and rituals of Judaism. Each of these covenants reinforces the other and strengthens the other, and one of them alone is not enough. It is insufficient. When someone wishes to join the Jewish people, I submit they must embrace both of these covenants so that the transformation that they undergo becomes both intellectual and conceptual as well as practical in nature, in addition, of course, to something that is spiritual. Because ultimately, conversion is a change in identity, it is a change in heredity, and it is a change in destiny. From a purely sociological point of view, it is clear that there must be clearly defined boundaries. A community without boundaries is not a community. And by definition, social identity is something that is exclusionary. When I define myself as a Jew, clearly I am differentiating myself from those who are not. So how do we draw those lines, those boundaries? I think that the past 2,000 years of Jewish history have made pretty clear what is the best way to do so. Conversion, from a practical point of view, as we know, involves three critical components. Kabbalat HaMitzvot, accepting the yoke of the commandments. Just as the Jewish people stood at Sinai and received the Torah, so too the convert reimagines or relives the standing at Sinai and the acceptance of the Torah. Brit Milah, circumcision. The convert is becoming a descendant of Abraham for all intents and purposes. That act is a tangible sign of the covenant that he has entered into. And finally, tefillah, ritual immersion. The convert must purify himself because the Jewish people as a whole strive to bring purity into this world. Now, obviously, we can disagree about what some of these terms entail, particularly Kabbalat Ol HaMitzvot. Does it represent an ambition that the convert expresses? Or does it represent a concrete demand immediate upon the convert to embrace a fully religious lifestyle down to every detail? That is a machloket, that is a subject of great discussion within Orthodoxy, as we know, over the past 2 centuries. But the fact is, I believe that ever since the Enlightenment, ever since the Emancipation, ever since we entered the modern world, or what some refer to as the postmodern world, or what others now are claiming is the postmodern world, whatever we are currently living in, for the past 200 years, traditional Judaism has, for all kinds of obvious reasons, chosen to raise the barriers to entry and make them higher, more challenging, and more difficult. Perhaps out of a sense of being under assault, perhaps out of a fear that many Jews were heading towards the exits, perhaps simply because after getting the stuffing beaten out of us for so many centuries, we turned inward and we decided to make ourselves even more exclusive. Whatever the historical factors involved, I want to suggest that we are living in a day and age where, as Bonita suggested, there is room to explore more flexibility and more leniency while remaining within the clear parameters of halakha. The late Chief Rabbi Rav Shlomo Goren, in one of his Sfarim, one of his books, Torat HaMedina, points out something very interesting. All the negative, all the critical comments regarding converts that one finds in the Talmud appear only in the Babylonian Talmud, the Talmud Bavli, the Talmud of exile, the Talmud that was written in exile. In the Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, however, he says, you will not find a single negative remark regarding converts. I think that points to something that we, as those who are privileged to live in a sovereign Jewish state, a reconstituted Jewish political entity, we can point to that and embrace that as a starting point. Perhaps now that we are living in such a reality, perhaps we don't have to be as strict as they were in Pressburg 200 years ago. Perhaps we can begin to recognize other elements of the puzzle, such as the socialization process that takes place when someone lives in the Jewish state, learns Hebrew, lives according to the Jewish life cycle, goes to the army, puts his life on the line for the land of Israel and for the people of Israel. Perhaps we can find a mechanism for attaching more importance to those elements, but again, without diluting the traditional halachic requirements. Because with all due respect to some of what was said from this podium, the moment we go down the route of saying all types of conversion are legitimate, every mechanism for joining or connecting with the Jewish people is just as equal as the other, it is a recipe for disaster. It is a recipe for tearing the Jewish people apart. I am the last one to defend the system that is currently in place. I have seen the tears of the converts and the potential converts and the would-be converts who have been torn apart by the system. I have sat in the room with them. I have heard their cry. I want to find a solution for them, no less than anyone else on this panel. But applying a Band-Aid or making them feel good is not a long-term solution for the Jewish people. In order to ensure unity, we must ensure that the path of entry into the Jewish people is one that is accepted and recognized across the board. Thank you.